So this is a yoga class now, right? That's what we're doing? Yeah? Hi, my name's Avi Namani, and I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and to Task. So guys, I'd never heard of this organization before, and now it's like, I'm gonna tell every state I've ever met that they should follow this exact example. This is amazing, so thank you guys. Okay, so let me be honest. When I got this invitation to come and speak, I was pretty nervous. So you'll hear about this more, but I work primarily at the city government level. So mostly with mayors, like cities, counties, that kind of thing. I've advised some states in the past, but really my specialty is cities. So I'm like, what the hell do they want from me? So I did what I usually do, which is call people who are smarter than I am and ask them what they thought. So I called my friend Rick Clow, who's the CTO of California, and he's like, you know, Avi, you should tell them about our new vaccine card open source app. I'm like, okay. I called my friend Beth Niblock, who's the CIO for New Jersey, and she's like, Avi, you should tell them about our new one-stop shop for business permitting. I was like, oh wait, hold on. There's a pattern here. Everyone is trying to sell something, right? Whether they know it or not, they're all trying to sell something. And frankly, you guys do it all the time too, right? Like, and no matter what you're doing in a meeting or in a presentation, you're selling the work that you're doing. What was fun for me when I realized this is I don't have to sell you guys anything. I have literally no agenda here. As you can see, this is why I started with this slide. So the work I do, as An mentioned, is I consult with private equity and foundations on figuring out what gov tech to invest in, and then I work with a portfolio of startups that sell specifically to cities and counties. So they don't even sell to you guys, right? So let me be very clear. I have no agenda aside from being as helpful as I possibly can. And I figured one way to do that is to do something we all talk about but never actually do, which is discuss failure, right? I wasn't here yesterday for the motivational speaker, but I'm sure they talked about you have to be comfortable with failure, right? Everyone says that, you have to be comfortable with failure. How many times do you guys usually walk around and be like, hey guys, I failed at this thing? Does that happen a lot? Yeah, that's what I thought. But guess what? That's what we're doing today. So, good morning, and thank you all for showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning on the last day of a conference. I honest to God thought there'd be like 10 people here, so this is way, way better. So what I'm going to focus on, as I mentioned, I work on cities, and in particular, I've been doing this the last 12 years. There's this term that's emerged that some of you may have heard called smart cities, which we'll get into more details. And the idea is that cities should be using data and technology more effectively. Again, you might ask yourselves as state representatives, as vendors who sell to state people, you'd be like, what the hell is this useful for me? Well, my goal today is to say, you know what, I failed in certain ways, and hopefully you can learn in the work that you're doing from that. Is that cool? All right, so let's talk about smart cities to start before we get into the depth of stuff. So what I like to do is I just do an image search for any topic I'm looking. I mean, I got a little paranoid about this because for a while when you looked up my name, you got my boss's name, my old boss's name. That was weird. But my favorite is when you do a Google image search for smart cities, you get this ridiculous set of mock-ups. My personal favorite is that third one over. I don't know if you see that. It's like Atlas, right? Like the Greek god carrying the whole city. So I'm actually imagining you carrying DOT in your hand. The point is, there's not actually a clear definition of smart cities, right? People disagree on it. I bet if we had more time today, we could have a lively discussion on what it means to be a smart government, right? What I'm going to do is stick to one definition, my definition, and then disprove basically every part of that. So where I came to my definition from is my first role working with local government. I helped start this nonprofit called Code for America. We jokingly called it a Peace Corps for geeks. The idea was that we would send developers and designers from any place, mostly like high-tech companies, and send them into city governments to solve problems, right? And as you guys all appreciate, as folks working in IT, by solving problems, we don't just mean making the network run faster. We mean addressing policy issues and helping address those using technology. Let me give you an example of that. So. These are two of Code for America's most famous apps. I'll focus on the second one, which is blight status. So I've told this story literally 1,000 times. All of them were usually a lie, so today I'm going to explain all of those lies to you. But what we said was there was this huge problem in New Orleans of vacant housing, blight, right? And people didn't know where blight was, right? And they wanted to track it, see what's happening. Is the city doing something about it? Are they rehabbing it? Is Habitat for Humanity coming to it, right? There's no visibility into it. So we had this idea, the Code for America, the organization, had the idea is like, let's take the data that we do have and visualize it. And chiefly, let's put that data openly available for anyone to use. So we put the data out there on an open data portal. Again, I'll get into that more in a second. And then our team of engineers, the 5 people we sent to New Orleans, built this app called Blight Status, which is basically, to be fair, just dots on a map. There's also a search function, which is cool too. The interesting thing was, the CIO, who is a private sector CIO they recently hired, who brought us in, said that to build something like this would cost roughly $2 million through RFP, and we only charge the city $180. That's also another lie that we tell. I'll explain that in a minute. But Discover BPS is another good example of that, which is basically saying there's this opportunity to use data coming from different places to create better user experiences so people can interact with their government better. Make sense? And so that became kind of the cornerstone of our strategy for cities. What happened at the same time when we were doing this work is a lot of people got excited about cities. A lot of people did. A lot of vendors did. I'm looking at folks maybe in the back, I don't know. And so people wanted a definition of smart cities. So we threw one out there, right? This is from GovTech Magazine, our 7 principles. And actually what I planned to do today was go through all 7 and explain how they didn't work. But then I realized it's the last day of the conference and you guys probably want me to shut up so you guys can go play golf or something, right? So I'm gonna focus on 3, chiefly because this model failed. Let me pause. The way we built things at Code for America, that model of a smart city did not work and is not sustainable. And it's because of these 3 core assumptions. 1 is that we can have all this open data coming from the city that people and entrepreneurs can use to build new things, and the city can use itself to do performance management and innovation, right? That was the first point. Second was, oh, you know what? Cities are similar. So why not build reusable solutions, SaaS, software as a service? So let's build an app store for cities. And third was the way to make this happen was let's place the best world-class CTOs, CIOs, CDOs into cities to help them drive culture change, right? That was honestly the cornerstone of our strategy for a smart city. And as I mentioned, it failed. So let's talk about why. So we're going to go through these one at a time. So the first one was open data to be used for driving innovation. So I just found this out. Are you guys familiar with SB 475? A little bit? Yeah? Maybe? No? Yeah? Okay. So I didn't know about it till yesterday. I read it last night. And the funny thing, to be totally honest, most of the requirements are exactly the same ones that we put in LA, exactly the same ones we did in California, and exactly the same ones we've done in lots of different states. So if you're thinking this talk may not be relevant, it actually highly is, because we literally required those same things at a city level that you guys are requiring now at the state level, okay? So let's talk about open data. I'm guessing everyone here knows what open data is. Just to be clear, open data is the weather, right? That's from the National Weather Service. They give it to weather.com, and that's how you find out that it's ridiculously 115 degrees here, because that's how you people live. Or, as An can tell you, transportation, all the data you get on Google Maps to figure out when the next bus is coming, the next train is coming, that's coming through open data published by local departments of transit that are making that data available for both Google and, do people still use Bing? Is that still a thing? Okay, yeah, and Bing. So there was already, we knew in the world, because this has been happening for 20 years, that there's great promise in open data. Things went to a different level in 2009. So President Obama at that time passed an executive order saying, his first executive order, saying that all government data should be transparent and publicly available on one centralized website, which again might sound familiar. SB 475, anyone? Right. So what was interesting about this, though, was not just so much, and we can talk a lot about that, and we can do that in Q&A, but what was interesting about it is it became so, I'll go back to this, it became so exciting that city, and states started doing the same thing themselves. So what had been done, which is to say publishing data to people to use, very strategically, right? Again, On can tell you, GTFS took a lot of time and a lot of work to figure that out to publish. Now the idea is, let's just publish this all openly, put the spreadsheets online, and people can do stuff with it. Part of the reason people were so excited about it and why things changed around that time was McKinsey. And as a consultant, I guess I shouldn't speak ill of kin, but McKinsey did this study saying that there'd be a $3 trillion of economic value from open data. I was a math major in college, guys. I don't know how you get to that number. But when you see that number, it's hard not to be excited about the opportunity, right? Both from a government side, right? You can create new jobs, new businesses, new innovation, and then from a citizen or entrepreneur side, this is gold, right? We literally called it jet fuel for innovation, right? So we got so in love with it, cities got so in love with it, this just became the standard. Basically data.city.gov, right? I think it's data.texas.gov, right? Is the current data portal. So what's funny about this, just as a quick aside, is most cities don't actually have .gov URLs. So like Oakland's is oaklandnet.com. Just take a second, think about that. It's not oakland.net, it's not oakland.com, it's oaklandnet.com. Anchorage is muni.org for some godforsaken reason. Point being, the idea that every city should be able to have its own open data portal and needs to have its own data portal became very popular. And as you can see here, this is literally 4 years ago, but there was a massive, massive push for open data portals around the world, right, and across the country. And in fairness, right, I'm guilty of this. I did this. Like, we literally wrote a book at Code for America about how to publish data well and to use that data to do things, right? So when I'm saying this is something that I believed in and I messed this up, I mean this truly. General point being, we saw a lot of promise in open data. This is 2013, 14, 15, right? But to be fair, we hadn't seen a lot of great examples. So I left Code for America, that organization's at, and was recruited by the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, to be their first chief data officer, which again, similar to the law here, is they passed an executive order saying you had to have a state, there's a state chief data officer in Texas, right? Yeah. So, there's some disagreement? No. Okay, yeah. So, this idea of cities having open data portals eventually moved into, we need to have chief data officers, right? And as SB 475 says, we need to have open data coordinators in the departments, right? But again, this model, and we'll talk about this more, starts with the leader, which was at this point me, at all of 25. And this title, this NBC article might not be the best thing for my career in the long term, right? I don't think I'm gonna get a job at any cybersecurity firm anytime soon, yeah? So this is actually not a picture of me, it's a picture of Eric Garcetti showing off the dashboard, which I'll mention in a second. But so I went to Los Angeles to say, all right, we've invested in open data, we said this matters, let me test this out, right? Let's see what can happen. And to be fair, we did pretty well on paper, right? So Los Angeles was the #1 open data city in the country. We published 450 data sets, became platinum certified. GovTech magazine said we were great, I even did a nice refresh of the open data portal to make it look prettier because we wanted to really invest in this because LA is a big city, 4 million people, right? They call it Silicon Beach. So there's apparently a tech sector there too. And so we thought this would be their jet fuel. There wasn't a lot of fuel. So it turns out that basically no one went to the open data portal, right? So on average, we had 500 visitors a month. And if you looked at all of the IPs that came in, most of those were city staff. And frankly, most of those were me. So I would say me and my staff, but I didn't have a staff. Again, we'll get to that in a minute too. So the craziest part about it though, right, was that we were paying $360,000 a year for this thing, right? Which, for a state like Texas, I don't know what your state budget is. For LA, our budget was $22 billion. So really, this is a rounding error in most cases. But for me, as the chief data officer, that's 2 FTEs, maybe 3, right? And instead, I'm spending that money on an open data portal that no one is using, right? So this is why, again, these are ordered wrong. If you build it, they will not necessarily come. And you could say, whatever, right? Let's just check the box of SB 475, check the box of open data, publish some data sets, and we're done. I strongly and fervently disagree with that. Because I think now more than ever, if COVID showed us anything, people need a trusted source where they can get their information, where they can get the data. And that's you guys, right? That's the state. And so even though no one's going to the open data portal, the information you have should be the source of truth and what people rely on. So the hard question is, how do you get that data into people's hands? There's other problems too, but there's going to be a common refrain for the open data piece, which is, here's what you can do. You can partner, regulate, and coordinate, all right? So let's first talk about how you can partner. You can't really tell this, but somewhere hidden there is the restaurant inspection score. I'm going to go with you. I think it's the B. But so one thing cities already do, right? Again, hence one of the values of open data is cities or counties, their departments of public health go around and check whether or not restaurants are healthy or not, right? And assign them scores. In this case, they were very, very creative of hiding that score. Other cases, they put it in the back so you can see it later. But more importantly, you don't get the data before you actually show up at the restaurant, right? So you're not making decisions based on data. You show up, see what's happening, and then respond. And this to us, this is back when I was still in LA, struck me as an amazing opportunity to change the way people use open data. Which is to say, what if we could integrate open data directly into the systems and services people actually use, right? So here's a picture of what we ended up doing. We made a data standard similar to GTFS. An's not paying attention to me. We made a data standard similar to GTFS and then worked with Yelp to actually get that data integrated, right? So now, I'm thinking it's actually live in San Antonio. When you look up a restaurant, you can now actually see the city or county-based restaurant inspection score. That's open data, my friends, right? It's not on a portal. It's not on data.sanantonio.gov. It's not on data.texas.gov. It's actually in your hands when you need it. What was funny about this is when I was working on this, my girlfriend at the time, we were making dinner reservations. She pulled up Yelp to look at something. She's like, Avi, do you know they have restaurant inspection scores on this? I've been working on this for 6 months. But that's not all. I mean, so the other thing is, by the way, with blight status, what we ended up doing was taking the data about housing inspection, so how houses are doing, and integrating that with Trulia, which actually makes an app like blight status somewhat irrelevant, right? Because you can just track those properties in those houses in the consumer sector services you use. Let me go one step further, though. So when we were in LA, this is the one time, by the way, I got TV coverage as a chief data officer. I know, again, whoever your chief data officer is, they're not going to get a lot of TV love. Just know that going into it. But this is the one time I did. This isn't a picture of me in it, but there is one later. But we did an interesting partnership with Waze, where, as you guys are all familiar with Waze, yeah, there's a little bit of driving in Texas, right? It's not really a walking around state. Waze, as you know, people submit issues, right? And so they track where potholes are, where there's traffic collisions, where the road's closed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they keep that data to themselves, right? How much would we love to have that data, right? Like, how amazing would that be for public works? Again, I'm thinking city level. Public works, for transportation, for street closures, the Department of Streets, et cetera, right? But they don't really have a huge incentive to give us that data as a city government, right? So what we did is we said, we'll give you an incentive, which is to say, we're going to give you all of our data about when roads are going to be closed, when we're going to be doing things, so you can proactively route people before they actually have to run into these problems. They're like, oh, that sounds really great. But we made a caveat. We said, we don't just want your data. We want access to the people who use your app, because that's millions of people who are seeing things, right, and can collect data for us. Which, in particular, what we did with them was we said we wanted to put out any alerts of a hit and run so people could catch the car that was running away from a scene of a crime, right? And Waze said, all right, we can do that. So now, in Los Angeles, when there's a hit and run in the city, and you have Waze open, it'll ask you, hey, this is the car that we're looking for, have you seen it? Right? In a hopefully non-distracting way. I guess I actually haven't seen exactly how that works, but We're just going to assume it's safe for now. The point being, though, and this is where it's important for both the folks who are going to be working on data in your agencies and also the state writ large, these partnerships only really work at scale, right? So if you're Yelp and the city of Houston goes to you and says, hey, I've got my health inspection scores, can you publish them? They're going to be like, maybe, but there's 20,000 cities in the US, right? So how am I going to get that same data from them? This is where standards come in, and we'll get to that in a second. But actually, more importantly, this is where scale comes in, right? The state of Texas, you guys have 28 million people, 1,400 local governments. That's a lot of scale. So you could very credibly go to a company like Google or Waze or to Yelp and say, hey, we've got data across the state of Texas around this really important thing. We think you should use this in your application. My guess, friends, is they'll listen. That's been my experience, and that was working at the city level. At the state level, the access and influence you have is much more profound. And by the way, I was not looking at the clock, so I have no idea how much time I'm taking. OK. All right, so that was the first problem, right? Second problem, security concerns and a lack of standards. I was told I should basically just talk about cybersecurity. To be fair, I don't know that much about cybersecurity, so I couldn't do that very well. But apparently, that's the whole theme. So we're going to talk about cybersecurity for a second, but in a very practical way. OK, so last night when I was hanging out with some folks, they asked me, so Abhi, you only had 500 users. Did you not do any marketing? Like, did you not go out in the community and get them to use the data, have events, that kind of thing? Guys, I did 2 events a month and 5 large-scale events throughout the course of a year. And still, that number didn't change. And here's an example of one of the events, and an example of why that number didn't change. So first of all, there was a drought in Los Angeles and most of California. So we had a campaign going on at the time. It was called Save the Drop. And we had a mascot called Droppy. Do you guys want to know who's in that Droppy suit? The deputy mayor. The deputy mayor. My shoes look better than that, guys. Come on. The interesting thing was, because again, there's so much power and interest around open data and the idea of what you can do with it, I got Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, one of the largest water and power districts on the West Coast, to say, we're going to host your hackathon, and we want to focus on the drought. I'm like, this is amazing, right? Like, people can do interesting stuff. And actually, I think with water data, you can actually do some really compelling things. Problem is, we didn't have access to any of the water data, right? So who has the data about how much water people are using? DWP, city agency, right? So you would think very readily the chief data officer for that city would be able to get that data and publish it for an event hosted at that department. I don't know if you see there. No. And the 2 most common responses, and I went up and down the chain, was first, there's no state guidance on how much data we can release without it being sensitive, right? So how specific can we get, and I'm not going to go too much in the weeds, but how specific from a geography can we get without giving away an individual's use of water, right? Problem is, the state of California doesn't have guidance on that. On other issues, like what's PII, personally identifiable information, on other sets of data, like healthcare, are actually much more clearly delineated. But for these other areas, like water, there's actually not guidance, at least in the state of California. So that's one take-home for you guys, is setting the standards around what is acceptable to publish is an important role for the state to do. Because again, what I heard over and over and over again is, like, I'd love to do it, but we have no clarity on what to do, right? The second problem, and again, here's the security piece, is that DWP was like, Abhi, I'm not going to let you write a new API into our servers. I was like, why not, guys? I'm 25 and really clever. But more importantly, right, we were using this new tool called Socrata that we use to publish our open data. And they're like, Abhi, we don't know this tool. We don't really trust it. And so we don't feel comfortable writing scripts to go straight from there to Socrata. What we can do is give you quarterly data dumps of Excel files. Who in here is an engineer? Like a software engineer? How useful is quarterly data for software? Yeah, it's not at all. It's not at all. It's good for reports and dashboards. It's not useful for actual software, right? So what ended up happening is we had this whole event, 600 people showed up, and not one application actually talked about water data. It was a water data hackathon, and it was more about ways to convert water into different things. It was basically everyone found other creative ways to do stuff about water that was not related to water data. So literally, the hackathon had the opposite effect as we intended. All right, so the point here is that ambiguous state policy can handicap local innovation, right? And I've seen this firsthand. I've lived this firsthand, as you just heard, right? Again, I wore the droppy suit at some point, but not at that conference. All right, so last problem with open data, and then we'll move on to other sides, is cities don't actually have the data that most people need. So this was the saddest part of my job in Los Angeles, is because I felt really cool with this nice title, whatever, I was young, running around, being like, hey, I'm in the mayor's office. And people would be like, hey, Abhi, what kind of data do you have? And I'd be like, we've got tons of it. We've got 450 data sets. And I was like, oh, we've got data on transportation. We've got buses, bullets. We've got data on crime, budgets, on our spending and revenue, and bills, basically all the laws that we're passing. They're like, we don't give a shit about any of that. Sorry for language. We don't care, is what they said. They said what they care about are these other 4 things. Education, which, as you know, cities don't usually control. 2, healthcare, which the closest proxy is public health at the county level, not at the city level. 3rd, environment. That's all you guys. Like, cities or counties don't really do much work tracking how well what's going on with the environment. And 4th was crime, which is related to bullets. But the problem is, again, this is a California-specific thing, but it might be clear here in Texas, is we can't officially publish crime data until the state verifies it, which means our official publications are about 6 months delayed. I don't know if that's how it works here. But point being is, all of the data people actually wanted to have, I didn't have. So I was like the least favorite person at the party, right? So what does this mean for you guys is that you, as a state or regionally, can help connect those dots, right? So yeah, the city has some really crucial data, like street closure data or transportation or traffic data, right? But the county has also really interesting data, and you guys as a state have really interesting data. Why are we building 1,400 data portals in Texas, right? Every city having one. Why not work either regionally to make data portals for entire areas, or statewide, and say, hey, cities, you have open data you want to publish, we'll publish it for you, which also has the added benefit of saving them that $360K that we paid. It would be cheaper for smaller cities. But the point being is, what we're seeing is there's an opportunity for regional open data. And what I have here are 2 examples. Western Pennsylvania has a regional open data center housed at one of its universities that actually maintains the open data. The city doesn't do it, the county doesn't do it, the university does it, but in close, direct collaboration with the state, with the city. In St. Louis, where I'm from, there's a similar thing. Washington University houses the open data portal for the region, and the city feeds in data, the county feeds in data. And by the way, one thing I don't say, and I'll get into this more in a second, is when people think about cities that may not have the money to buy an open data portal, they may think of like these small rural towns in the middle of nowhere. That's not the case, right? I live in St. Louis, Missouri now, actually a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. It's about 30,000 people. It doesn't really make sense for that place to have their own open data portal, right? But it's really relevant data if you live in the St. Louis region. So what I would say is think regionally about how you can implement open data as well. So, and this is the main takeaway from all of this, hopefully while you guys are working on, SB 475 is, before you just start publishing data out there in the wild, ask people what they need, right? Like, I had that presumption of those 4 things people wanted. Turns out they didn't want those 4 things. And if I knew that, I might have gone and just focused on getting those 4 things instead of writing an open data policy saying I need every department to give me 3 pieces of data, which is what I did, right? What was fascinating is that first picture I showed you, where I tried to look like Eric Garcetti, showed a picture of the mayor at the US Conference of Mayors giving a keynote showing the dashboard I had built for him. He loved it. He showed it to everyone. He actually showed it to the LA Times before it was live, because I hosted it on GitHub, and he figured out how to get to the live link there, which is crazy. But what was interesting about the dashboard I built for the mayor, it had 40 metrics on it. Half of them did not come from the city, right? half of the numbers that the mayor needed to see to do his job, as he thought, did not come from city government or from city government open data. Which is to say, we have to think more critically, more thoughtfully about how we're finding data, how we're connecting it, and how we're presenting it to the people who need it. So again, the main takeaway, the recommendation here is partner, for instance, with Yelp or Waze, regulate, set up standards and rules so cities can do stuff, and third, coordinate. Instead of having cities do the same thing over and over again, can you connect the dots? One of the reasons, and we're moving now to the next piece, is one of the reasons this matters is because when people think open data is all there and easy and they can do whatever they need with it, is people like the New York Times get these crazy ideas in their head. You guys see this news article when it came out? Right? People think, oh my God, why is the government failing so bad when someone can build this for $50? Right? As we all know, there's no way it actually was just $50. And more importantly, that's not how government technology works, right? It's not just building something randomly on the side. I should just hold this thing so I'm not walking back and forth. Good technology takes time and money. Can I get a cheers for that? I mean, we all know that, right? The vendors in particular should be very excited about that comment. No one? Okay. So that's what I'm going to talk about next, which is we had this idea of, okay, there's this huge government technology market, and let's build a marketplace of solutions, right? So we built Blight Status, that Discover BPS, the Boston tool I mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. Like, why shouldn't every city be able to have it? And in particular, again, as we know, we spend a lot of money. The US government, state, federal, and local, spends over $200 billion a year on technology. Just to put that in perspective, the video game industry is $61 billion a year, right? Xboxes that your kids and stuff get crazy about is literally a third, less than a third, of what we spend on technology. Wearables, smartwatches, et cetera, $42 billion. So the GovTech industry is massive, and most people don't know that. But that was one of the reasons we thought, oh my gosh, we can encourage entrepreneurs to get into it. And in particular, we saw the real opportunity in local, but also in states. Because federal, there's huge market in federal. It's actually not as big as you think. So let's take a second to look at these charts. So if you look at the overall spending, there's basic parity across local, state, and federal. But if you take out DoD spending, Department of Defense, state and local are actually much higher than federal. So there's actually a huge opportunity at the state and local level, and as I said, particularly for software as a service, reusable tools. And this was kind of the vision we had, or I had, frankly, around this idea, which is small pieces loosely joined, which is like, let's have a bunch of little apps that do specific things that all connect together, right? And smaller cities can use those. And so at Code for America, we actually started an accelerator program. You guys may be familiar with accelerator programs. It's basically you invite entrepreneurs and new startups in, give them some funding, and mostly give them support, mentorship, and help. What we did in particular was connect them to our network of cities. Actually, one great Texas-based company was called Aunt Bertha, is now called findhelp.org. They were one of our first accelerator cities. They just raised $100 million. And so we work with a bunch of companies. This is actually the other companies I work with. And so for me, personally, this idea of a thriving GovTech marketplace is really important. And what's awesome is the market keeps growing, right? We keep spending more and more and more money, and we did a survey, which we'll talk about more, where this number is going to probably keep going up and up and up. So as a business person who's invested in these companies, this is wonderful news for me. I mean, as you can see here, the GovTech market seems to be doing great. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of large-scale acquisitions, meaning that the entrepreneurs who started these companies are actually getting paid, which actually feeds more into the system. So you're probably thinking, this is great, Abhi. Why is this a failure for smart cities? It's a failure for me. So I grew up in a small town of 10,000 people in southern Illinois. And we had a city staff of 10 people and a part-time IT manager. And my dream was always that the stuff I was building at Code for America, the stuff I was building in LA, stuff I was building in Sacramento, would eventually make its way back to Centralia. That's the hometown. That didn't happen. Because as you guys may know this quote, the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. And in particular, we're leaving behind small cities. So there's a nonprofit called Civic Pulse that does statistically relevant surveys, not like the stuff you see from Public CIO, which is just like calling 10 of their friends of the writer to get their sentiment. This is actual surveys with statistical sampling. We asked some simple questions, which is like, has your city tried new technology, right? Have your city tried, in particular, SaaS or cloud-based technology? For large cities, almost all of them, right? 98%. And then it keeps going down. The biggest point is category 4, the small cities, Centralia. Only 49% of those cities have actually deployed some kind of new cloud-based or SaaS software in the last 3 years. The scarier part of that number, though, my friends, is that that's the one category that says they may spend less on SaaS in the future, which leaves a question, which is, how are they going to deliver services? And we'll talk about that in a second. But the more important point is, look at this. We have way more small cities than big cities, right? San Antonio gets a lot of attention. Houston gets a lot of attention. Austin, LA, Sacramento. I'm often described as a big city guy, and I'm actually really not, because as you can, so again, Centralia, but there's basically 18,000 small cities and a total of about 3,000 or so bigger cities, right? And by the way, for like 1 million plus, there's like 15, right? It's actually not a huge number of cities that actually fit into that category. So here's the interesting problem, and why I actually think the marketplace has failed. The first reason is because as someone who coaches entrepreneurs, I don't tell them to go after the 18,000 small cities. I can't. As an investor, it's not practically useful because, let me just go ahead and I'll jump back. Because as I heard from an entrepreneur, they need to have quick revenue, large deals to show their investors that they're having success and traction. Going after city after city after city, that it's 10,000 people for $500 contracts, doesn't really scale very well. I mean, it doesn't happen quickly. It could scale very well. It doesn't happen quickly. So what ends up happening, as I mentioned, is we coach people to focus on cities around mid-size, what I just generally describe as mid-size cities, right? But here's the problem. I'm going to go back. I apologize for the ordering here. I talked to a city manager about this same problem. And I asked, like, so what are you looking for? Like, it would make sense if you're a small city, something simple that's all SaaS, easy to set up and ready to go. Wouldn't that be great for you? He's like, no. Like, okay. He's like, Avi, we actually need professional services on top of the software we use. And again, the vendor should be cheering right now. No one? Okay. But the point is, what he was trying to get at is, even if we have this great tool, and even if I can pay $1,000 a month for it, and I can afford that, I still don't have anyone who can implement it, who can train our staff on it, and who can market it, right, to other people. So he says he needs a consulting firm, and then my other friends, again, going back here, are like, we don't have the time to actually just sell them, let alone do consulting. So this, to me, is the fundamental problem, right? Is that there's a business model problem in the smart cities industry where it doesn't make sense to go after the small cities. So we basically have recreated the last mile problem that we're seeing with the digital divide in digital services, right? And then if you think about the fact that small cities are actually going backwards, it's going to get worse and worse over time. So what you can do, fix it, please. Just fix it. Cool? No. There are two key ideas that I've seen work in other states. One is leverage collaborative purchasing agreements. You guys do this all the time as agencies, right? Piggyback on contracts, out on subcontractors, et cetera, right? You do that at the state level. Could we not expand that to local level, either working with the state or just encouraging small cities to band together and purchase things collaboratively? There are two really interesting organizations I'd look at if you're interested in this. One's called Co-Procure, and the other's called Marketplace.City. Marketplace.City actually did a project here in Texas with the lake cities where they all reinvested in public Wi-Fi as 4 different cities together instead of just one alone and got a better deal for it, right? So that kind of collaboration really unlocks or opens some doors. The second is enable standards for interoperability. We don't have time to go into it today, but one of the big problems is vendor lock-in, if you guys are familiar with the term, which is that you buy something and all the data's there, so it's impossible to get the data out and move to something else. So what are you going to do? You're just going to keep paying that same vendor over and over and over and over and over again, right? But if we had standards for interoperability or requirements for interoperability, that could move the needle where you could say, all right, I'm using Acela for permitting now, but I want to move to Tyler, right? and you should be able to do that somewhat seamlessly. Right now, it's next to impossible. Back to my entrepreneur's point, he's like, I could go after really, really big cities, but those are actually really hard too because you have to integrate with their existing systems. So, okay, so that was problem one. Problem two, cities are worried about cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is a top priority for local government officials based on that survey I mentioned. It's also the number one reason small cities are looking at SaaS, and a lack of staffing is the number two biggest reason cities want to go to SaaS. Let's just do the math there, right? We care about cybersecurity, we don't have staff, and we want to pick SaaS software that we think is going to be secure. Anyone see a problem? No? Okay. So my thing, and actually I just found this out yesterday. Well, Texas has TX Ramp, right, where you guys certify certain companies that any agency can use across the board, right? It's similar to FedRAMP, which is the same thing at the federal level. Now, one city alone, it wouldn't make sense for them to have Austin Ramp, right? But if you extended Texas Ramp to cities, that could help that entire bulk of 1,400 cities actually move the ball forward and make better decisions. There's a slide I skipped over because we're running out of time. A friend of mine is the CIO of a small Midwestern city, and he stood up Zendesk during COVID in like 3 days because it was the easiest thing for him to do. He's a smart guy, and Zendesk is good software, right? But imagine he's not as smart of a guy, and it's not Zendesk. So there are profound cybersecurity concerns that we have to be serious about. At the end of the day, though, I love this quote. So my friend Robin Carnahan is now the administrator for the General Services Administration at the federal level. And her point on all this stuff, and she's been a whole friend of mine for 10 years, and she's seen everything. She's like, Avi, I don't give a shit about anything else you're doing. Just make the websites work. So that's the advice from the head of the Government Services Administration. So that's how we got the market wrong and how we hope cities can fix it. Last piece I want to talk about is the third prong of our strategy, which was let's bring in world-class, top-notch CIOs, CTOs, basically you guys, but not you guys, from the private sector, right? And have them create a new culture of innovation, right? And the reason we thought that is again, based on data in a certain way. Boston created this new unit called the Department of New Urban Mechanics. It was like the first innovation office, basically, for cities. And this is two of my close friends, Nigel and Chris. They did wonderful work, right? Building things. To be fair, they had a whole team, et cetera. But this idea of like really smart people in a specialized unit focusing on innovation, to us at Code for America and to me, was really exciting, right? Because that's kind of a solvable problem, right? Like I can go find the top 100 or so executives who would want to go to government and help connect the dots. And literally, guys, we did that. So there's hundreds of CXOs that have been placed over the last 10 years, specifically focused on innovation across the country and cities. My favorite are some of the different titles they have. If some of you guys have some of these titles, I'm sorry if I'm making fun of you. I've had 2 of them. So the challenge with this model, guys, is kind of obvious, which is, oh, sorry, no, that changed. Well, whatever. The challenge with this model is it's hard to do work alone. Also, more relevantly, this process looks at a singular person as the driver of change, whereas there's a huge number of government employees that aren't part of that process. So state and local government employs 20 million people in this country. And what ends up happening, and I know this very, very firsthand, I teach at UChicago, I go to Wharton, I work with Harvard. What ends up happening is universities and other training centers focus on basically the ends of the spectrum, right? Like, let's get really smart new people hired in, or let's take the mayors, the chiefs of staff, or the CIOs, and then train them. But guys, there's this whole bunch of people inside local government who aren't getting that same experience. By the way, that same mentality goes to recruitment, not just training, right? We end up focusing, and literally I can tell you this, end up focusing on hiring new CIOs and CTOs and not hiring sysadmins, project managers, et cetera, right? And not training them either. And so the point here is that no one can do this stuff alone. And so instead of just focusing on the periphery, right, if we can start building a team working on the inside, then those people with those ridiculous titles will actually have people around them that can help them. Teams actually do work. So what you can do is, in particular, two key things. One is invest in local leadership development, and two is local recruitment. Let me just check time. So the example that I love to point to is Denver's Peak Academy. The mayor of Denver has done really wonderful stuff around tech and innovation, but this is probably the best thing they've done. It has nothing to do with technology. They basically do Lean Six Sigma training for anybody in the city who wants it. They have a 2-day program and a week-long program. And if you want to just learn how to do this for your, whatever, DOT project or anything, they'll help you run through the Lean process, and then you can use that in your day-to-day life. The coolest part about it to me, though, by the way, was that the mayor literally did the 5-day course himself. So he took 5 full days out of his schedule and said, I'm going to do this Lean training, which is kind of putting your money where your mouth is, right? And I'd recommend, if you guys are thinking about similar things, do that same approach. But sometimes you can't build it in-house, right? And for cities in particular, we can't always build it in-house, and nor do I think we should build it in-house, right? Like, I don't think every single city should have its own how to work in city government intro, workshop, et cetera, or here's how smart cities work training. It should be, I think, more general and more accessible. Here are 2 examples. Pepperdine has a smart city certificate that they provide to mid-level managers to help them get more comfortable with using technology. University of Colorado Denver has a smart city certificate program as well. Michigan's starting one. Illinois starting one. I don't know, are there universities here in Texas? I don't know. So one interesting thing to look at is how do we connect the dots between what folks at the university, I know the university CIOs are here, and folks in the government better, where we're actually helping train the folks from within the government IT department in these public universities that we run and manage, right? It's like such an obvious connection, but sometimes goes missed. The other piece to this is recruitment. So one of our old board members, named John Lilly, he said CEOs, I said good leaders here to be more general, CEOs basically spend half their time recruiting and the other half on sales / fundraising, right? Do you guys spend half your time on recruiting? Do you guys have half your time to do recruiting? Right? We don't have that function, right? Because as C-level managers, as high-level managers, we have a job to do managing the day-to-day government of business, the day-to-day business of government. So going out to hackathons and events and being like, hey, do you want to come work for the city? It's kind of hard, right? And moreover, I mentioned all of those titles, the new titles in cities. One that wasn't on there was Chief Marketing Officer, right? Because we have not invested in that at all. So we actually tried to help. This is back from when I was at Code for America. We gave a talk at South by Southwest over in Austin called Making Bureaucracy Sexy, trying to get people more excited about it. It was really just to draw home the point that marketing is more important. I got the first one, the Bureaucracy Forever. I got the Got Milk one. I still don't get the old lady one. I think that... Oh, okay, there you go. Thank you. Now I understand that one. But do you guys see governments churning stuff out like this right now? No, right? Like, so we don't have that function inside government, which makes it harder to get more people excited about government. By the way, I just realized there's a clock right here. I've been looking at my watch the whole time, and there's a clock literally right in front of me. So I wanted to get a sense of how governments do recruiting now. So I did a simple search. City manager positions. This is one of the top 5 results that you get. Now, this, I think, is probably the best piece of government marketing I've ever seen. Right? And it goes to this really nice looking web page, but this is awesome, right? And so what we have to think about is how do we get more clever, right? Like, yeah, stuff is hard and it's difficult, but people should be excited about that, and we should have some fun while doing it, right? And here's the point, just to be very, very practical for you guys. Local leaders become state leaders, right? A local CIO is a great person to hire as a deputy CIO for your agency, right? So helping cities recruit, and maybe that's just drawing more attention to public service in general, will in the long run help the state of Texas. All right, so what now? And this is actually working just on time. So what now, right? So like smart cities have failed totally? Yeah, kind of. Here's what I would argue is what is actually smart. First, as my friend Robin says, just make the websites work. 2 is have market access for all different kinds of vendors, but more importantly, market access for all different sizes of government. And third is, instead of focusing on hiring great leaders, let's focus on building capacity. Thinking about this, and this is what I'm going to close with, is it's tough talking about failure, right? That's what we started talking about. And in a lot of ways, the smart city did fail. In a lot of ways, it didn't. But the most important thing is that we learned from it, right? And there's a great book called Small Pieces Loosely Joined that describes kind of the early days of the internet. And there's this great quote that the web was designed to be imperfect, right? It's not supposed to work perfectly because it's rough around the edges, so you have to fix it, right? It gets you excited to fix it. The web is broken on purpose. Governments kind of are too, right? And that's the point, is that we need to figure out a way in which we can make small civic pieces loosely joined. Connect the dots across governments so the whole, the state, is greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you. We've got 8 minutes for questions, or we just move on.